We have an incredible group of presenters. We're very fortunate to have Brigid Kenney, who's going to serve as moderator. She's Senior Policy Advisor for the Maryland Department of the Environment. She began her career at the Maryland Department of the Environment in 2007, serving as in the Office of Secretary, first as Director of Planning, and currently as a Senior Policy Advisor. Her responsibilities include sustainable growth, regulatory development, and regulatory reform. She leads the department's Marcellus Shale Safe Drilling Initiative and provides the staff support to the Marcellus Shale Advisory Commission. Before joining the Maryland Department of Environment, she practiced law for almost 30 years at Venable LLP, where she was a partner and focused on environmental law. Though she lives in Baltimore, the very good woman, proving her worth, spends her weekends in Garrett County, where she and her husband have a home near accident. I've never asked her how close the nearest mineral lease is, but maybe she'll tell us when this is over. Please give a very warm welcome to Brigid, who's going to take over the forum. That big green blob you see is not the Marcellus Shale. The big green blob is the Utica Shale, which underlies the Marcellus. In Maryland, they're pretty much coextensive and cover all of Garrett County and part of Allegheny County. The yellow outline, which I hope you can see, is the barrier, the boundary of the Marcellus Shale. Maryland has only about 2% of the natural gas that's in the Marcellus Shale, as compared to Pennsylvania, that has more than half. West Virginia and New York have 22 and 23%. So you can see that Maryland is not a big player in the overall picture. Nevertheless, Maryland has something like 1.3 trillion cubic feet of gas that are potentially recoverable. And even at today's depressed gas prices, that could have a very significant local impact in Garrett and Allegheny counties. I gave another presentation where a photograph of my niece flashed up every 10 seconds. I couldn't figure out how to make it stop. The gas in Maryland is probably what's called dry gas. That is, it doesn't have many liquid hydrocarbons, but we won't really know unless some wells are drilled to determine that. There is more wet gas to the west of us, and that is much more valuable. We've seen a shift of the drilling rigs and interest to places in Ohio and West Virginia. So to have sort of a conceptual idea of what Marcellus Shale drilling is about, you can see the land surface sort of floating up there at the surface at the top. And then there are 4 drilling pads, small white dots that you can see. Each one has put down 6 vertical wells, which then turn horizontally in the Marcellus Shale to expose the maximum amount of the formation. This is an artist's drawing from the Chief website of what drilling might look like. We start with no drilling, the first drilling location. More drilling rigs are installed. In this picture, some are actively drilling, some are in production. It doesn't really look very different from real life. This is an aerial photograph from Dimock, Pennsylvania, which shows the location of many of the wells. A typical well in the Marcellus Shale, this is a sort of a schematic drawing, would be drilled vertically through thousands of feet and through many different formations and types of rock, some of which contain water and some which do not. The deeper water contains a lot of salt and is not usable for either drinking or agriculture. As the well is drilled down, steel casing is inserted into the borehole, and cement is circulated down the hole so that it flows back up between the casing and the borehole, sealing off the borehole from the formations around it, including the water-bearing formations. There are usually several concentric layers of steel casing as the well continues further down, and each one would be sealed with the cement. As the vertical drill approaches the target formation, in this case the Marcellus, the drill rig is switched out, and horizontal directional drilling begins. The drill bit begins to turn, and as it enters the Marcellus Shale, it would be following along the horizontal horizon of the shale. This is a drawing that is meant to illustrate what happens in the horizontal portion of that well after all the casing and cementing is done and the drill rig has been taken away. The casing in the target formation is perforated with explosive charges. This is done section by section in the horizontal borehole, not the whole horizontal borehole at the same time. Until this happens, there is no connection between the formation, the gas-bearing formation, and the well, because it's got a solid steel casing. So this perforates the casing. After that is done, the next step is fracturing, where fracturing fluid is forced down the well casing at very high pressure. This is also done in stages. The fluid enlarges the fractures that were either naturally occurring or were created by the small explosive charges and creates additional fractures. The sand or other small solids in the fracking fluid hold these small fissures open so that they don't close up again, trapping the gas. And then in the third production phase, some of the fracking fluid flows back up to the surface. In the Marcellus Shale, we're getting about 30 to 40% of the fracking fluid returned to the surface. The rest remains underground. And then the gas, which has been released from this tight shale formation, is free to flow to the surface where it is captured and piped for all of us to use. There's been a lot of talk about what makes up the fracking fluid, and in a Marcellus well, they might use 3 to 5 million gallons of water to frack a well. Chemicals will be brought to the site to be added to the water, as will the propant, the sand. The chemicals will come in a relatively concentrated form and be stored on pallets, usually at the site, until they're used. When fracking occurs, the water, the chemicals, and the sand are all mixed together. And when they are mixed together, the chemicals are present at a very low concentration. So typical fracking fluid would be about 90 to 91% water. It would be about 8 to 9% sand, and less than 1% chemicals. Now, the industry likes to emphasize that many of these chemicals are used in household products or in cosmetics, and that is certainly true. However, some of them are not, and they do pose a risk if there were an exposure to a significant concentration of them. As I say, the concentration in the fracking fluid is very, very low. A year ago, it was hard to find out what exactly was in fracking fluid, but in a cooperative effort between some government agencies and the industry, a website called Frac Focus has been established, and almost all the drilling companies are posting on Frac Focus after their drilling is complete a description of what chemicals were used and an approximate range of the concentrations. One thing we don't know or one thing we know much less about, is the makeup of the fracking fluid that comes back out of the well, because of course all these chemicals have the potential to react with each other and with the formation, and what comes out is not exactly the same as what went down. And maybe the biggest challenge facing Marcellus Shale drilling is the disposal of this fracking wastewater that comes back up. So Marcellus Shale drilling presents both opportunities and challenges to Maryland. Opportunities for Maryland and the United States of improved energy security and perhaps a better balance of trade if the natural gas is exported. Natural gas releases much lower levels of greenhouse gas than either coal or oil when it's burned to produce electricity. And there's a potential for significant economic development in Garrett and Allegheny counties. The challenges, of course, are that the operations pose a potential risk of harm to public health and safety and the environment. And there are community and social impacts, which, if they are not anticipated and managed, can be damaging. In Maryland, drilling is not completely new to Maryland. We did have a lot of gas drilling in the 1950s and 60s. Most of those wells are now out of production and are used for storage. But the Maryland Department of the Environment has a mining program that issues permits for gas drilling, coal mining, sand and gravel mining. A permit is required before any drilling takes place. The statute and our regulations give my department very broad authority to impose whatever conditions in a permit we think are reasonable and appropriate in order to protect public health, public safety, and the state's natural resources. There are regulations in place that specify certain things. For example, that the casing has to go at least 100 feet below the lowest freshwater aquifer and be cemented back to the surface. But these regulations have not been amended since 1993, and they were not specific to Marcellus Shale horizontal drilling or high-volume hydraulic fracturing. In addition to the gas drilling permit, other permits may be needed if the gas company needs to find 3 to 5 million gallons of water and they can't buy it from a municipality or some other source. They might have to get a water appropriation permit to take that water from either surface water or groundwater. My department issues that. They would need air quality permits for the drill rig and supporting equipment. If any of their access roads or their pipelines crossed wetlands or floodplains, they would need a wetlands permit. And there could be some local permits. Barbara talked a little bit about the planning and zoning requirements that are in effect in the Deep Creek Lake area. There are controls on grading and erosion and sediment control. In June of 2011, Governor O'Malley issued an executive order that directed my department, MDE, and the Department of Natural Resources to work together with a 14-member advisory commission to conduct a study and to issue reports on pretty broad topics, short-term, long-term, and cumulative effects of natural gas exploration, best practices, and what changes should be made in the laws and regulations. The executive order does not actually establish a moratorium on drilling. If and when the department believes that it knows enough to issue a permit with adequate safeguards, it could issue a permit. Right now there is only one application pending, and that application is currently incomplete, and so it's not moving forward. The Advisory Commission is issuing its report in 3 phases. The first one, it was issued at the end of last year. It related to revenue and liability issues. It recommended, for example, a state-level severance tax. A bill was introduced but did not pass. It recommended a change to the liability structure. One of those was passed. Our next report would have been due last week, August 1st of 2013, on best practices, but we realized that it just wasn't going to be possible to do an adequate job by then, and so we requested, and the governor granted, an extension of time. The current schedule calls for us to produce a draft report on recommended best practices by the end of this year, by the end of 2012, to have it out for public comment for a period of time, probably 30 days, but possibly longer, and then to issue the final report as soon as we can after the close of the comment period, but not later than August 1st of 2013. In practical terms, I think it's unlikely that the department would feel that it would know enough to issue any permits, at least until the conclusion of the best practices report. That would be the earliest. And our final report on remaining issues, which would include economic impacts, community and social impacts, public health, will be due no later than August 1st of 2014. So now that you understand, I hope, the sort of basic facts of Marcellus Shale drilling and also where Maryland stands right now, we're going to hear from people with different perspectives on a variety of different issues.